Greetings and welcome back to Son of the Cinema. One of the pros of doing these videos, I get to choose the movies, and of course, I choose all my favorite films. And this one is one of the best science fiction movies of all time, Ridley Scott's 1982 masterpiece, Blade Runner. Now, I'm not a big fan of science fiction, but there are a few that for me were really seminal. And Blade Runner fits that category. I've watched it many times, and it is just one of those cult classics that you never get sick of watching. But there was so much trouble that was associated with this movie. It's very much like Jaws, very much like Apocalypse Now. It was a film that was created in a perfect creative storm of disaster. And some films crash under that pressure, others seem to thrive on it. This was one that thrived on it. But interestingly enough, it was not well received at the time. And one of the reasons for that was that it was released 2 weeks after E.T. And of course, we all know that E.T. was a monstrous success. And so it bombed at the box office. And interestingly enough, it also opened on the same weekend as The Thing, another fantastic sci-fi stroke horror movie directed by John Carpenter, which I will definitely be reviewing in the future. And that also tanked at the box office because of E.T. And interestingly enough, both of those movies later on achieved cult status and a cult following and were revered by critics later on. So very interesting parallels there. So it's based on a novel by Philip K. Dick called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Not that if you had to read the book, you would see similarities, because Ridley Scott didn't even bother to read the book. He just found the subject matter interesting and decided to do his own take on it, regardless of what was actually in the book, which is quite interesting. Hampton Fancher wrote the screenplay, and he had some dealings with Philip K. Dick. And he said, well, he was a bit of a Charlie. He was very theatrical and said that he heard from God. Now, of course, that's a very worrying side. Anyone who says they've heard from God, unless they're an Old Testament prophet. But Hampton Fancher developed the screenplay. It went through a series of rewrites. In fact, Ridley Scott even forced rewrites while they were shooting the movie. Now, all those kind of things are a recipe for disaster, but somehow this movie came out the other side, and it was somehow came together a perfect storm of creative forces. So Ridley Scott, with a commercial background, was a bit of a perfectionist, and this kind of boded well for the project, but also made it extremely difficult to work with him. The American crew apparently hated working with him, and he hated working with them. It was his first movie in America, so he wasn't used to working with American crews. And he went as far as to say, very early on in the shoot, he prefers working with British crews because whatever he asks them to do, they just say, yes, governor. And so the American crew weren't very impressed with this, and they all rocked up the next couple of weeks with T-shirts that said, yes, governor, my arse. So that, of course, created even more tension. Ridley Scott hired, I don't know how many crew members, a lot of tension on the set. The first 2 weeks, they were shooting in the set that was supposed to be the Tyrrell Corporation. And he shot for 2 weeks and then suddenly decided he hated the set, he hated the design, and decided to reshoot all of it. So they were already, after 2 weeks, they were 2 weeks behind schedule and behind budget because he didn't like the set. So you can imagine how this endeared him to the producers. And it just went on and on and on like that. Ridley Scott is notoriously well known for being difficult to shoot with. I have a few friends that have worked with him, and they say the same thing, that he is extremely pedantic, a perfectionist, and has no problem with hiring and firing as he sees fit, and changing things, and even putting the shoot on hold until the design can be redone to his satisfaction. But having said that, Blade Runner does benefit from this kind of madness because the look is sublime. The production designer and the art director, Lawrence P. Paul, absolutely brilliant set design, production design. It was nominated for an Oscar. It won a BAFTA, and it won, I think it was I don't know, it was a London Society of Film Critics. But a lot of a lot of awards came his way. And of course, the music by Vangelis. I mean, with those opening scenes, with those incredible high rise buildings amidst these starships and the lights. And just this, when Vangelis's music swells up and you see that reflection of the balls of fire that sort of go up reflected on an eyeball. Now, that effect was actually achieved. Interestingly enough, Ridley Scott stole from Fritz Lang. There was an idea that he used in an earlier movie whereby using a mirror and at 45 degrees to the angle, they could actually reflect to get that effect. So a lot of mastery involved in this movie. Ridley Scott, whatever his narratives may be like, his visual brilliance is undeniable. Every movie has got his visual stamp on it, and Blade Runner is probably the supreme example. It is brilliantly designed. From the costumes also won BAFTA awards. I think it was Michael Kaplan. The cinematography by Jerome Cronenweth, absolutely superb. He won a BAFTA for it. And I think it was the Los Angeles Film Critics Association for Best Cinematographer. Sadly, he actually died a few years later. In fact, while he was making Blade Runner, he was suffering from Parkinson's, another massive problem with set. At the end of the shoot, apparently he was filming from a wheelchair. And, you just got to take your hat off to artists who push through, for their vision, for their craft. So many people who were committed. And he was a prime example. I mean, absolutely brilliant work by him on this movie. Died too young, very sadly, at the age of 61. I mentioned the script before. The script has its problems, but it just seems to hold together a kind of collaboration of the actors and the screenwriters. Actors contributed dialogue. But let's get to the story. So the story involves the Tyrell Corporation that have gone into this Nexus project where they're basically designing replicants. And these replicants, the Nexus 6 project, they are sort of hectic military style replicants, and they're not for Earth. They basically used off, I think they call it off colony to whatever work they were doing in the mines. And these replicants, a group of these replicants, rebel and kill all the people on the spaceship, and they come to Earth, and basically a kind of a contract has been put out on them to terminate them with extreme prejudice. So these replicants are to be retired, and the job falls on Blade Runners, and Harrison Ford plays Rick Deckard, who is the Blade Runner who is tasked with finding these 4 replicants. But the film is so much more than just a kind of a chase theme. It's an existential journey. This is Ridley Scott's existential. He's basically kind of said this is his favorite movie, and it does ask some pretty pertinent questions. Roy Batty, who plays the main replicant, brilliantly played by Rutger Hauer, he is trying to prolong his life. He's trying to find meaning. He's looking for his creator, the man who made him. He wants answers. And there's some incredibly memorable sequences in this movie where you see these replicants are kind of, so human and questioning their existence, asking questions that many of the soulless humans around them are not asking. And the world of Blade Runner is so extraordinary. It's kind of this perpetual rain-soaked, neon-lit, dark atmosphere. It's such a unique look that has been copied in so many movies but never perfected. The look is really, really sublime. I mean, the lighting in this movie is sensational. It really should have won the Oscar for cinematography, but the lighting cameraman does a brilliant job in this movie. It's all about light and shadow, and Ridley Scott kind of has made no secret about the fact that he styled this movie on almost being a futuristic noir. Now, the famous noir movies of the 40s, which always cinematically played with shadow and light, and this film is no different. It's brilliantly lit. And a prime example of this is, in fact, Sebastian's apartment building with these strobe lights and the dank, huge, cavernous spaces with these shadows and light. And that's where the main climax plays out with Deckard versus Roy Batty. This is really a visual feast, this movie. It's all about mood, it's all about atmosphere, with very many memorable performances. Harrison Ford has gone on record to say he hated the film. He hated working with Ridley Scott, but has sort of since turned around and acknowledged that it was the outcome was a brilliant one. I can't see anyone else playing this role, this sardonic kind of Philip Marlowe type detective who is harboring a secret. And those of you, I'm not going to say what, the man who's hunting down the replicants. There's a twist in the tale, and it's a very ambiguous kind of twist. You don't know whether it's true or whether it's not. And everybody from Nolan to many others have kind of used this twist. Rutger Hauer, mentioned him before, a standout career-defining performance. This is the film that really launched Rutger Hauer. And he's even responsible for probably the most famous piece of dialogue when Roy Batty is kind of about to supposedly kill Deckard on the top of the roof. He delivers this beautiful monologue where he says something to the effect of, "I've seen things that you people wouldn't imagine. Attack ships on fire off the shores of Orion. I've watched sea beams glitter outside the Tannhauser Gate. All these moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain." And it's a beautiful, and he wrote it himself. The production was going through such stress that Ridley Scott tells the story that he was going to be fired at 3 a.m. in the morning. Rutger Hauer called him to his trailer at 1 a.m. and said, "I've written this speech." Ridley Scott was like, "This is brilliant." They went out and filmed it. The producers were like, "Okay, we'll give you another couple of days." And that speech lands up in the film, and it is one of the most quotable sort of moments in film history. Absolutely beautiful. Sean Young, don't know what happened to her. She also hated working with Ridley Scott. Funnily enough, she said that apparently he asked her out on a date at the beginning of the film. She turned him down, and the rest of the film he made her life a living hell. Right. Yeah. You go, Ridley. Yeah, so many problems on this movie, and yet the result is a masterpiece. Watch it, enjoy it, soak it in. Blade Runner is all about atmosphere. It's all about mood. It's all about layers. You can watch it over and over again, and the detail, the attention to detail in that film is really sublime. Say what you like about Ridley Scott, he is a master of production design, of art direction, of visual genius. And for once, he has a film that actually has a narrative that supports that vision. Most of his films, unfortunately, do not. But Blade Runner is a prime example. Yeah, a beautiful piece of filmmaking that will stand the test of time.